There it is. And we are live. Thanks so much for showing up for those that are in the chat room. If you want to leave a comment there, we shall see here. And but I am Dave Jackson. I'm the head of podcasting here at Podpage. This is our February community meeting. And joining me right over there is the one and only Brenden Mulligan, who's the founder, lead developer, the dad of podcasting that makes all things happen. And we're great that you guys have all come out to join us. I see you've got a couple people in the chat room, so that's good. What we're going to do today is talk about a few new features. And then we did this probably, back in August, we did kind of an Ask Us Anything. And
I think it was when you started.
Yeah. So it might have been back in July. And we had a lot of people ask a lot of really good questions. We are not afraid of our customers. We actually love them, and they have really good ideas. In fact, we're going to talk about some of those today. But Brenden, anything else you want to add before we start talking about the new features?
No, I think that's it. We've been doing these community meetups for a few months, and we're still in the experimentation phase of figuring out what's the format that we should do every month. We've now done one that was more of like an announcement and us just talking about Podpage. We did one that was an interview with a podcaster. What did you do? What was last month?
I was trying to think of what we did.
Beginning of the year, I can't remember. Oh, you did a session on
interviews. Yeah.
Interviews. And then we're trying out the AMA thing. So our goal is to come up with a good format that works so we can just do every month. So we appreciate any feedback everyone has.
Yeah. So the first feature that we thought we'd talk about, if you weren't around when we released this, and it's, I think, one of, if not my favorite, I preach this all the time, right? That we always say, when you want to have a successful podcast, one of the biggest things you have to do is know who your audience is. Because if you don't either educate or entertain those people, then, you're going to lose them. You're not going to grow an audience. And of course, you also need to know your why. And so there's a great book called The Audience is Listening by Tom Webster, who just got inducted into the Podcaster Hall of Fame. And there it is. Yes. And it really is a great book. And Tom's been measuring audiences going back decades. He, at one point, was working with Howard Stern on the radio, and he put these questions together, and Brenden had come up with, we need to make a survey to help our customers, and have, we always want you to build that connection with your audience. And so we reached out to Tom and said, hey, you've kind of done the work for us here. Any chance we could borrow these? And Tom was nice enough to say yes. There's actually a link to his book when you go to the survey page in Podpage there, but it's great to where you can actually go in, and there are, I believe, 19 questions that you can use from Tom. Now, you don't have to use them all. In fact, I'm doing one on one of my sites where you basically can I think I have 4, if I remember right, questions. Let me switch over here because Brendan's sharing his screen, and that's what it looks like. And you can go over, and the beauty of it, we always want you to reinforce your brand. So whatever your website is, I always kind of just call it yourwebsite.com, but you can go in there and pick your, whatever questions you want to send. And then when you actually get those answers, you'll be notified. I was at Walmart last night, and there on my phone, it says, hey, Dave Jackson, somebody answered your survey. And so I was like, excellent. So that was, it's super easy to use. And then it's just yourwebsite.com/survey. So Brendan's got a demo there. You can go through it and pick whatever options you want.
Yeah. So you can, this is what the actual experience looks like for the end user. So they're on your website and they're clicking through. When you're creating one, you can go through and you can name it whatever you want. No name. And then you basically to go in and you can edit all your questions. So we have a lot of the questions on by default. And again, a lot of these come right out of Tom's book. And you can just go through and toggle the questions on and off that you want to answer and that you don't answer, or you don't want to ask, you don't ask. And then if you want, you can set an incentive. So you want to say, fill out my survey and I'll send you an ebook. We can take care of all that for you. So you can have all that in here. And then you can see your responses over here. We've got, here's one that we've done where, generally this is what your responses are going to look like. So you can export your data at any point. You can put it into any other tool that you want. It's all your data. So this is how it works. We launched this, about a month ago or 2 months ago at this point. No, we launched this around when Noah was born. So 3 months. So people have been using this just, again, to try to get a better sense on what their listeners want and what their listeners love about the show. So
Richard had asked if I put the name of the book in the chat. I did that. It's The Audience is Listening by Tom Webster. So it really is a good book. So that's the survey. And along the way, if you do one of these surveys and you learn things from your audience, feel free to, send those in. We always love to hear that our tool is helping you make a better show. I know I got some feedback the other day, and I kind of scratched my head because I started using AI sometimes to kind of organize my notes before I record. And somebody actually said, we like Dave a little more scatterbrained. And I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. But it was feedback. And I was like, all right, maybe it's, you can't fix what you don't know is broken. And so in that case, that person wanted me a little more, a few more tangents, apparently. So, but again, that's an easy one to use. The answers come right into your back end where if you're an Excel nerd, if you want to download a CSV and upload it to Google Sheets, whatever your tool is, if you want to do some more number crunching, that's all in there too. Another one, and Gigi is in the house. This is when we talk about we make things based on user feedback. Gigi said, thank you for adding the newsletter feature. Dave, I remember asking you for it when we were at Podcast Movement. This is in DC. The Buzzsprout folks had suggested I find you and ask you for that. So yeah, and I remember saying, hey, we have, if you guys didn't know, we have /follow, which when you set up your player links, you'll have your Apple, Google, Spotify, iHeart, all that. We got /follow, we got /voicemail. So instead of saying, hey, we'd love to hear from you, just go to the website and click on the microphone in the bottom right-hand corner. You can just say, no, just go to mywebsite.com/voicemail. We just mentioned survey, so /survey, /rate. If you know your episode number, so if you're using Buzzsprout or Captivate or Libsyn or whoever, and you put the episode number into that field, creatively named episode number, so let's say it's episode 12, you could say, oh, everything we talk about today will be at mywebsite.com/12, because Podpage makes that for you automatically. And what was interesting is we didn't have a /newsletter. And so I threw that at Brenden, and he said, yeah, it's a good idea. And so the next thing I know, a little tweaking here and there. And if you can now say, oh, if you'd like more information from me, all you have to do is go to mywebsite.com/newsletter. And so one of the things I wanted to point out, if you aren't familiar with our pricing plans, we have the basic plan that'll basically bring in your episodes. And then the pro plan adds a lot of interaction with your audience through the voicemail and all that stuff that we do to really make sure your contact page. And then there's the elite plan. And I always say the elite plan is for that person that wants to go just a little more, like out of the box. We have a ton of built-in SEO juice for your website. We're going to do all the things on the back end to make sure that your website can be found. But you always have that one person that's like, hey, can I tweak the meta words and maybe the keyword? Okay, they want to go this much more. So that's an elite plan. There's people that they like the contact page or the guest intake form. Those are some other pro features. But you have that person that's like, is there any way I could export that into my Notion? Okay, that's an elite plan. So it's that these little things that maybe not everybody needs. A lot of times it's a marketer. And so with the newsletter, when you go into Podpage to set this up, the top one to where you can have your sign up form, and that could be from Podpage. We'll talk about that.
Do you want to show, like we can screen share?
Yeah, let me, on yours or mine?
I've got it pulled up.
Yeah, perfect. Let me, we'll switch over to here. Beautiful. And that's the wrong one. We want this one. There we go. Perfect. So there's a newsletter. So In this case, you can see it's super simple. You've got your name, your email address. You click a button.
Just want to make this clear. So if you've turned on a newsletter sign up form, regardless if you're using the Podpage one or you've entered your ConvertKit or your MailChimp or whatever, that will activate this page. So if you have it, generally a lot of people have always put this newsletter sign up form in their sidebar right here. So if you've turned it on and you're collecting email addresses, we will automatically also create a page for you that's a /newsletter page, and it'll just be a dedicated place. And again, like Dave mentioned, this is for the time where you're on your show and you say, hey, I'm going to send out a really amazing newsletter tomorrow. Please go sign up, mywebsite.com/newsletter, as opposed to saying, go to my website and find the form. So that's what this is. I don't have, Dave, you're about to talk about the sort of the importing, right?
Yeah. So if you're using, whether it's Substack, Beehive, or ConvertKit, you can actually have your previous emails imported into your website. And then you can also choose there under the settings, when people click on this, do you want them to go, let's say you're on Beehive. When people click on it, do you want them to go to the Beehive website where it kind of is in the cloud? Or do you want them to make it look like it's right on your website? And so the thing I wanted to make sure of here is the /newsletter, the thing we're seeing right now on Brendan's screen, where you have the sign up form. That is a pro feature, and you can use that if you're on pro. Hey, let's have Beehive, Substack, or ConvertKit import our old newsletters, that is an elite feature. Again, I just want to go a little further, and not everybody needs that. But so when you go to that particular page to turn that on, you'll see where the top says, put your form here, and you pick how do you want it. Do you want Podpage to collect the emails? Do you want to use, your own form? So that is at the top. That's a pro feature. And then you'll see when you go down towards the bottom that, these right there, you'll see those are marked as these are elite features. But the one at the top there is if you're on pro. The other thing I wanted to point out with that is we are not an email list tool. So what happens sometimes is people will kind of show up, and we're always happy to have them as customers, and they're like, hey, I never knew I should have an email list. And some people don't. Not all podcasters are different. But they sign up and they're like, oh, I actually do want to monetize this. And you're like, oh, a good thing to have is an email list. And so what you can do is have Podpage collect the email addresses for you until you figure out who you want to use. And there are a million of these. There's MailChimp and Aweber and Beehive and ConvertKit and Substack, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we can collect them. Now, we're not going to notify anybody that is signed up on that. We're just collecting them for you. And then let's say you decide to go with Substack or Kit or Beehive. In those tools, you can export out of Podpage, and it'll give you a file, and then you just upload that file to, let's just say, Beehive. So now all your people are in Beehive, and what you can do then is in Beehive or whoever you're using, you can get the code. So again, there's really no coding here. All you have to do is copy and paste, and you copy the bit for your form, you paste that into Podpage, and now we're out of the picture. When somebody signs up on your website, they're actually signing up behind the scenes with the service you're using, whether that be Beehive or whoever. So that's when you see Podpage collects the email, that's all we do. We don't want to compete with MailChimp. We don't want to compete with Buzzsprout. We're not a media host. We're not an email list. We build websites that are pretty and simple and powerful. And so we try to always integrate with everything, and that's what makes it easy. But we're not an email list. So Randy Black says, I like SendFox. SendFox is a great tool. It's from AppSumo. And what's interesting about them is I think it's either $29 or $39 for lifetime use. And then if the goal is just to send out an email, and they have the ability, SendFox does, as does Kit, as does Beehive. A lot of times you can take your RSS feed from your media host, whoever that is, again, Libsyn, Blueberry, Captivate, and put it into your email list, and they will convert in the same way that when you publish an episode, Podpage goes out and turns it into an episode on your website. When you publish again on your media host, those email tools we'll turn it into a newsletter and automatically send it out to whoever signed up, if that's something you want to do. So that's the power of RSS. And yeah, being in voice with Floyd Kennedy says, I'm on the pro plan. So yeah, you're fine to use that newsletter feature. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm guessing this is Floyd.
Yeah.
So you're asking, what Floyd was asking was about the listener survey.
Ah,
It says my listener survey is closed. I don't ever recall setting it up, let alone closing it.
yeah.
I can look, but what that basically means is when you create a new survey, we automatically close it because we don't want you to be in the middle of like starting to create it and someone find it and start filling it out. So every survey is closed by default. You could, and then, and all you have to do to set up a survey initially is just give it a name. So you might have hit that and set up a name. We don't automatically create surveys for anyone. So my guess is you might have just been clicking around and accidentally set one up. And when you set it up, it's closed. And so that's that.
And so both the survey, if you think about it, the survey and a newsletter are two ways to engage your audience, because we know that's what we all want. Another one is, this is brand new. We just rolled it out Monday. And this was, I think you saw this on All the Hacks, if I remember right, Brenden, but there was somebody.
We're moving on to the.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is hard without a deck. Let's do a deck next time because I'm so lost in where you're going. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the homepage in a minute. But one thing that I've talked about a lot is that you really want to put your best foot forward. And so I've seen this on other generic websites, and this is actually a Podpage website, and this was hacked to add this little bubble at the top. And I was asking the host about this, and he was like, well, I really want to put that social proof, or that proof that my podcast has achieved something at the very top of my page to give people an idea that this is a real podcast that has done well. And so he built this badge and he put this as custom coded, really crazy hackery to get this up here. And so the other day we just decided to turn this into a feature that anyone can use. And so when you go into your dashboard, you go to pages, you edit your homepage, and there's a section for homepage header. Right now it's down here. We're going to move it but this is just kind of down here for now. But you can take your homepage and you can add what's called the achievement badge, something that you want to brag about. This is not intended to be a sentence. I know I can't wait. I think I've actually put restrictions on the copy because I figured I'd go in and someone would put a paragraph here. But it's supposed to be like a very quick, what's like one thing that people would find impressive? It could be that you have 1,000 episodes. It could be that you are the #1 podcast in Apple for business. It could be that you've won an award. It doesn't really matter. You can put in whatever you want. It could be you've had, let's say 20 million listens. You just put this in the text field, and then you can style it however you want, and it'll show up at the top above all of your other content as that like anchor, like this is something that we want to brag about. So you can kind of see it at the top here. The reason that we added this is because I've been doing for elite members, I've been doing essentially like a free deep dive design session with me. And so we get on the phone, we spend 30 minutes going through their website, and some people come to the table and say, hey, I've been trying to like make my page do this. Can you help me? And it's about just me helping them achieve some specific thing. A lot of these calls have been like, how do I make my page better? And I've started to see some consistency after doing 30 or 40 of these. And a lot of it has to do with this top section. And the core things that I'm finding, and I don't actually have a great example. I can use this example, this Armchair Expert example. But let me open this up. If they were to come and say, hey, what should I do with my website? And we hadn't just added this 20 million listens. Let's just take that off. What I would be talking about would be overall, I'd say like your messaging, you could improve your messaging and give people a better sense on why they've gotten to the website. Why should they stay? And who are you? Because you got to think that most people are going to come to your website are going to be brand new listeners who have never heard your show before. Most likely, as much as I want to say the website is the thing that everyone's going to use always, really what's probably going to happen is someone's going to find you somewhere, come to your website, listen to an episode or two, or start listening, and then eventually hopefully subscribe to you on Apple, Spotify, or wherever they want to listen to podcasts, right? They're not going to be coming to your website every time you release an episode. And because of that, you should be thinking about the people hitting your website as people who don't know anything about you. And so my guess is that if someone came to this website, they had heard about this podcast somewhere. They probably had learned, they probably clicked the name somewhere. So when I come to this podcast, I think, all right, well, I kind of already know what the name is. It's great that it's here and it's also up here. And most people already also have the domain name and it's also in their title. And so I've been working with a lot of people on is rethinking the way that they're introducing their show to that new person, and making sure that new person knows what they're getting when they come here. And again, like I think a better example would be because this is like a famous person. A better example would I was talking to some people who ran a beekeeping podcast yesterday, and at the top of their site, if I can find it. Yeah. Yesterday, this text was Beekeeping Today podcast. That's what it said. And they also actually didn't have a media player here. And this is a good example. I wish I had the before picture. And then they had their episodes down here. And as you can see, they don't have a lot of like visuals. And so the first time I ever come to the site, I said, all I know is you have the words Beekeeping Podcast Today here. You have it here. You have it in your domain name. You have it in your title bar. I think I get it. I get the name of your podcast, but like, I was like, is there anything you can tell me about your podcast? And I was talking to the podcaster. And they're like, well, we're the top beekeeping podcast in the world. And I was like, I would have no idea that you are the top beekeeping podcast in the world. All I know is you're a beekeeping podcast. You could have started yesterday. You could have started 2 years ago. And the length, I mean, we all know a lot of people who have done podcasts that say they're going to do a podcast. They do like 2 episodes and then they quit. So even just doing it for a long time is an accomplishment. So there's so many people I talk to that I'm like, I don't know that. All I know is what your most recent episode is. And maybe some people, at least I know for this, if you're on the inside, that this probably means episode 319. Not everyone would know that. But I've been really pushing people on like, think about how you want to, someone's at your website, tell them why you're great or tell them what they're going to get. It's kind of the 2 things I feel like are the right way to do it. So like this example that we always use, there's reasons that the podcast isn't upfront because of the podcast is called All the Hacks. And because he deals with credit cards don't like the word hacks on the website, on the front of the website. So like he can't really he doesn't want that up front. So that's why it doesn't say all the hacks, but it does say all the hacks up in the title bar. But what he decided to do was say like, well, the show's gotten bigger. People know it. People love it. So I'm now, instead of just going to say like, this is the All the Hacks website, I'm going to tell people what they're going to get, what value I'm providing them. And the value that he provides is upgrading their life, money, and travel. And so he's like, all right, how do I want to convince people when they come to the site that they should stay? Tell them what they're going to get. And this sounds pretty good. But it's kind of generic, right? Like anyone could build a website and write this. All right, well, how do I show that I'm good at it? Well, there's 1 million listens. It's really hard to get 1 million listens. All right, so there's some proof that it's successful. There's a pretty nice value statement. There's a really crisp, like, what am I going to get? I'm going to learn the strategies and tactics. So like, this is, not super long. A lot of people's podcast descriptions are really long. This is just like, let's just hit them with what's important. And then let's show some social proof of like actually featuring reviews that are very succinct and show that I actually can deliver value. Episode 104 saved me $16,000 a year, right? Like, that's pretty compelling, right? It's not a long thing of like, oh, I love All the Hacks because it's a great show about when they interview experts, and I really like experts because it's just like he picked things that are short and succinct, right? So this section isn't a section that I've been working with a lot of people on when we do these design things. It's not really even about making it look better, and that's the irony of this design session that I've been doing with people. So I thought it was all going to be about making the websites look nice. It's actually really more about the presentation of like, what's your core brand? This is a little bit of a sneak peek. I haven't even shown Dave this. I'm trying to figure out a way in the product to do that, where like you kind of fill out a little questionnaire, and then we're going to use some AI to help you craft this. I would actually show this, but actually I think it might work, but it probably all equally could break. But this is what I do on these calls. I'm like, I don't know these people that I'm talking to. I don't know the podcast. So I have to ask like, what makes your podcast different? Like, are you like a niche topic, or are you broad but you're a famous person, or do you have some weird access to famous people, or okay, like then if someone listened to all your episodes, how would their life or knowledge be improved? Like this is sort of like what's the holistic thing that your podcast is going to deliver to them? And these are all questions to try to tease out though what's great about it. Why should someone listen? Is your podcast hosted by someone with relevant experience? Because this I hear this a lot where someone there's not a big section at the top that says about the host, even though the show's about money and the host is a very successful investor. But it's just like talking about the show. I'm like, well, I feel like the reason that I'm going to listen is because you made money and you're successful. And like, I don't actually care about anything except tell me about you. Tell me about this is where you're dumping your knowledge. That's what's important. And then I ask about downloads and listens, because sometimes this is important. Sometimes it's not. So it's fine if they only have 1,000 downloads. We just won't mention that, but we try to get all this information. And then the goal of this tool is then to turn around and deliver this and to help you figure out like, oh, what's the best way to present myself, and then go from there. So that's just like a little sneak peek, but that's something to think about. Is this, with Beekeeping Today, they basically had the name of their podcast a bunch of times. They had a really long description that was kind of boring. It was hard to read, didn't get to the point. They had no episode at the top, and then you just saw their recent episodes, but it was really kind of unclear that these were even episodes. And so we added a media player to make it really clear this is a podcast. We put, a lot more, and this is all can be improved. This was just a 30-minute upgrade. But, and then the other thing we did was we added a featured episode section, and they're using it in an interesting way because I asked them, I was like, if someone comes to your website, what's the episode they're looking for? And they're like, how to get started beekeeping. That's how they get people hooked. And so we actually built this featured episode section to really be talking about like, here's how to get started with bees. And these are the different episodes for that. So we need to do a little bit of updating some of the artwork for it because it's a little monotonous seeing it all. But, it's like, hey, I'm new to this. Oh, it's a top beekeeping podcast. Wow, that's cool. If I want to listen to the most recent episode, I can do it right here. And then if I want to get started here, the top beekeeping podcast getting started guide, that's probably a pretty good place to go. Again, all of this is just to get someone to listen and to someone to like click that subscribe button. So something that I'm working on, but I thought I'd share it because I'm doing all these like one-on-one sessions with the elite members and trying to redesign. And this is what's really come out of it for everyone. Has been like, we can talk about designing. I do a lot of cleanup with design for them, but like this is really what we really get into. It's like, okay, what's the best way to present yourself? For someone last week, it wasn't the top in the world, but it was like the #1 finance podcast in the UK. It's like, well, put that up there. And they're like, well, what if people come that aren't in the UK? I'm like, the UK there's probably a lot of podcasts. Even if I'm in California, I don't care. Like if I see you're the top in the UK, I don't care that you're not the top in the US. Like that means something. And again, like it means a lot more than Chris's business podcast or whatever it was called.
Right.
So,
and
anyway,
Mark, we're going to get to your question in a second. I just want to let you know I hadn't forgot about you. But kind of on the subject that Brenden is talking about now, Gigi had a question. She said, it would be great if there were more template options that focus on what the show is about and who the host is first thing, that the listener would see. Most of the templates seem to focus on the episodes, and you can kind of customize that. I mean, I've seen shows where you actually turn the episodes off. And this is kind of where it depends on what your show is. Sometimes I have a podcast that also has kind of a side business. And then other times you want your website to be all about your business. And oh, by the way, there's some episodes at the top. The beauty of that is you can easily customize the header and the homepage. Something I've been playing with. It's not really ready for prime time, but I'll show it anyway. So this is my website for my consultancy. And when you come down here, you'll see here are my products and services. Here, it's basically a sales page, but I've still got the link at the top if you want to go up and click on. I have the episode right there, so it's going to play my latest episode. And then here, if you didn't know, this is another great feature that's kind of built into Podpage, and most people don't realize. If you're using categories in your episodes, so if I say, show me all the episodes about technology, there they are. And so it makes a page for that. So if you're doing an episode and you're like, oh, this is, another show about technology, you can find all of our shows about technology here and put a link to this page. But I know the templates are, they're great. And I always say they're a great place to start. And many times you don't need to adjust them at all, but you can. The template is just a starting spot. You can kind of come in and tweak it to, whatever you want. It's really, it's up to
Yeah,
you.
and I think this is, but so that is the answer of, if you work hard, you can get there. But I totally agree that, Gigi, that this is what I'm working on right now. There's a few different angles. I think that what we've found over the last couple of years is that there are some people. I mean, people ask me all the time, like, "Hey, I saw the All the Hacks website, or I saw Jay Klaus has a great looking website that someone was asking about yesterday," and they're like, "How do I make? What template did they use?" And I'm like, "The template's a starting point." So they chose, and I was like, they chose Stone or whatever it was called, and I was like, but then they spent hours and hours and hours customizing it with all the stuff that we provide. Then they hired a designer to write custom code that manipulated it even more. And and so I do think that our templates are too generic for just like, hey, let's put the podcast cover at the top. And the hard part for me, that honestly, the reason that it's hard, you said template options that focus on what the show is about and who the host is first thing. The reason that's hard, if you remember creating a pod page, is all we ask you is what your podcast is called. And then we create a whole website that looks great from day one based on what's in your feed. The thing that's not in your feed in the majority of cases is we don't have a picture of the host. We don't have really information about the host. And so it's really hard for the way that we do pet websites today, as far as the onboarding goes, it's really hard to be like, hey, look at, these are all the websites we created for you. And here's one really great one that, what did you say? Focused on who the host is first thing on the page, because usually we don't have a bio and we don't have an image. And so the approach that we took, and now we're sort of sliding into the AMA, and this is, I'm happy to share, is that like the approach that I took when I built it is, if you go to Squarespace and you go and say, I want to build a website, what they're going to show you on the template page is a bunch of websites that do not have anything to do with you. And then you pick it, and then you have to like figure out how to make your content look as good. And it never looks as good because they've hired professional photographers to put images in. And the same thing happens when you buy like WordPress or Bootstrap templates. Like you buy this thing and it's like, oh, this looks great. I'm going to be able to launch a website in 2 seconds. And then when you download it, none of the images are there because they're not yours. And then you have to create a bunch of animations or images or illustrations and images. So my initial thought was, I don't want to put people through that pain of like, hey, you thought that the page was going to be easy and beautiful, but when you actually turn it on, like when you generate it, now you have to provide a picture of you with it's well lit and has no background. And if you do that, then the template that you chose is going to look amazing. But if you just have like what most people have, which is just like an average picture of themselves, it's never going to look as good, right? So this is a challenge. I'm currently going through how to deal with it, because I do think that our pages are too almost like episode podcast specific. There's a lot of people who want like hey, I'm Brenden. I want to launch a website about me, and my podcast is going to be on there, but it's really about me. And getting Podpage to do that is hard right now because it's not the list of templates. So anyway, just want to let you know, I think we might put like placeholder content, right? So it could be a picture of just a random person, and you just have to swap your picture in. There's a lot of stuff we've got to figure out. Another thing I've been playing around with is the idea of going to someone's website and just being able to say, I want my website to look like this, and just generate a pod page based on someone else's website. And that could be people on Podpage or not, right? Like the not would be we meaning Dave or I go through and actually like, let's take Tim Ferriss. Like we build Tim Ferriss's website using Podpage, which is going to require lots of like detail work and customization. But once it's all set up, then in theory, we could put that up and say, if you want a website exactly like Tim Ferriss's, just click copy and we'll take all the settings that we did and you have your own site that's based on that. Now, the negative about that is that if you change anything, then you break everything. And so, again, there's just challenges for it. But, but I have noticed that, like, I think something like that would be, or the guy who was asking about Jay Klaus's. If it's a Podpage site, so I have all the settings, they could literally just copy it over, and I don't know how Jay would feel about that. But that's something that we've thought about doing, where you can like kind of browse the directory of Podpage sites, and you say, I just want my site to look just like this, and you can just do that. So
There
it's
you
a
go.
challenge. But I do think that this year specifically is mostly, like, for me, a lot about how do we make the design of the sites better? How do we make creating them easier? How do we make getting to a place that you're happy with faster? So
Excellent. Mark is asking, and then Gigi, I'll get to your other question. Is there a better company to distribute all of my podcasts instead of Spreaker, which is now iHeartRadio? The way I always explain this is, because I love analogies for whatever reason, that let's use an airplane or an airport runway. That's your media host. They're giving you a platform to launch from. And so if I take a red Corvette in Texas, it's going to go about 190 miles an hour. Great. Take that same Corvette, which is your show, and put it on a runway in Maine. It's going to go 190 miles an hour, because a media host, their goal is to deliver MP3 files when somebody clicks play or download or whatever app it is. And so it's not really the media host that grows the show. It's the content. It's your show. And this is where having Podpage really comes in handy, because now instead of saying, find me wherever you find your podcast, and you should never say that, because search in Apple and Spotify is horrible. I have people all the time like, I'm searching for my show, I'm typing in the exact name and I can't find it. So say, oh, go to mywebsite.com/follow, because once you do finally find those links, you can put those in Podpage and now reinforce your brand and make it easy for your audience. And so they're not really, just make sure on Spreaker that you're in, Apple, Spotify. That's going to get you about 80% of the market. And then you can throw in Amazon and iHeart, and there's a bunch out there. So just make sure you're everywhere that is free and capable, because they do give you an RSS feed. And, like if I said Captivate doesn't get you in any other, app that, Spreaker would get you into. They're both serving RSS feeds. So in the end, in terms of getting more exposure, they're all pretty much doing the same thing. So just one of the things I always say is be sure to ask your audience. If you're not sure what to say at the end of the show, be sure to say, hey, today we were talking about how to make your website really grab people's attention when they show up. Do you know somebody who's working with a website? Could you do me a favor and share it with a friend? Share it with that one person and let them know. That's a great call to action, because birds of a feather flock together. And so they might know somebody to do that. And so Gigi had another question. She wants to know, do we have a short list of show-off websites? So if I wanted to go see what other people are doing, in our Facebook group, we just posted this question a couple weeks ago, and everybody was putting their links there. So you could go there and see what other people are doing. I don't know if we have a featured list anywhere.
we don't have a public gallery right now. We have a private one, but we don't have a public one at the moment.
And then
we need to add that. I want to go. Randy he did a follow-up question around the podcasting 2.0 enable feeds that have a host. He was sort of referencing, I was like, we don't have host information. He was saying, well, in a podcast, I agree with you. I love podcasting 2.0. We try to support that as much as possible. I think, although I could be wrong, I think we automatically will import the host information into it. The issue is when trying to build an onboarding flow for anyone who wants to build a new website, to have to rely that they're using a podcasting 2.0 host, and they've done that, and the picture's good. It's like the scenario for it to be good is too hard, and it's not worth the time and effort to spend building for that scenario. I'd rather try to figure out, it doesn't matter if you don't have an RSS feed, you can still see a template that looks good with a person on it. So that's kind of the initial goal. It's the same kind of concept as someone who has, our templates look really good if you do episodic artwork and it's colorful. A lot of our templates look really, really good. If you don't, like the Beekeeping Today one, our templates leave a lot to be desired, because you just see the same image like 50 times. And so we do have templates that don't have that image, but I've thought in the past about sort of like God, like I would rather to the Beekeeping Today person who doesn't have episodic artwork, I'd rather show them a template of someone who does, so they can see why we have the images all over the place, as opposed to like here's an example. Let me share my screen again. I'll go back to the All the Hacks website just for fun. Where did it go? Because Chris does episodic artwork, when he does grids of episodes, he turns all the text off. He actually wrote custom code to hide all the title, the description, the publish date. He doesn't want any of that because he spends a lot of time like kind of putting what you need to know here. And so it's a simple way to look at it. This is just how he likes to display his episodes. But like this was Beekeeping Today. It would just be you would now see whatever that is, 13 Beekeeping Today words. So again, it's this. This is where, and this is just me kind of sharing my thought process right now. Is I've got to rethink templates a little bit, because I'd rather someone see this page and be like, "Oh my god, I want my page to look like that," and then they can work towards this, as opposed to if I just took this template and showed them their page, it wouldn't look nearly as good. So I get why Squarespace and why the other places do it. I think it ends up making it a little more compelling as to what you can build with the platform. But I've got to figure out how to do it for us, because that magic moment of seeing your website, your podcast as a bunch of different websites is also very magical. So
yeah.
Challenge.
Floyd says, if you want to host with excellent support, I found Buzzsprout to be great. I have friends with Red Circle. Yeah, the only, I don't want to bash anybody, but really, Captivate, Buzzsprout, Libsyn, Blueberry, you can't go wrong with it. Red Circle, Spotify, sometimes I hear shaky things about their support, but you got to keep in mind, how much are you paying Spotify? Yeah, nothing. So you're if you have any issue with them, your answer is, well, I'm not going to not pay you anymore. And that's not much leverage. So Gigi says this is exactly why a gallery of best sites would be helpful. So yeah, we'll have to look into that.
Again, I'm being honest about what's happening in my brain. I agree. But you know what happens, Gigi, when we do that is then Dave and I get endless emails being like, how do I make it look like that?
Yeah.
It is a reasonable question. But Chris has done so much customization to his site, including custom code where he hides fields and stuff, that most people would look at. Like if I were to copy all of his settings into your dashboard for your website, I almost guarantee you would go crazy, because everything would be, he's done so much custom code that everything would be impossible to change. You'd be changing settings and they wouldn't change on the page and you wouldn't know why. So again, thinking through, if we were to do it, I'd probably rule out anyone who's added any custom code to their site, which might actually rule out a lot of the people who would be the most compelling sites to look at. So anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of going back to Randy's comment. You can always create your own feed and host your own on a CDN. We'll realize that's great. You have to know who Randy is. Randy is the IT guy for a whole school system. So Randy is a very proud and very good and very talented nerd. And I say that with love and affection. But realize we're Podpage, where you don't have to know coding. And so as soon as you say to someone, oh, just get your own CDN, they're like, camera delimited nachos? So you got to keep in mind that way. But yeah, I hope some of the 2.0 stuff trickles into more media hosts, so that there's, an actual, which would then trickle into apps. That whole thing needs to get pushed. And right now, in my opinion, the whole 2.0 movement is a little stalled. Needs a little more momentum over there. I haven't given up on. I'm sorry. Oh, how offensive! I called him a nerd. Randy is a geek, not a nerd. Excellent. And also earlier we were talking about categories. Chris Stone from castahead.net. I love using the categories. I too am a big fan of that. And also what's interesting is when I turn that on, and it's just a setting where you can say show categories in the drop-down field. I didn't realize how many, I do one show that's just me talking about whatever's going on in my life. It's basically a little personal diary. And half my episodes are about the holidays. And I was like, we might want to come up with something else besides what happens at Christmas. So it was a really easy way to see what I've been focusing on and things of that nature. So categories are, they're, like I said, they're really handy. The other thing I thought I would point out, because I don't think everybody knows we do this, with if you're doing guests on your podcast and you send them the guest intake form and they fill that out, one of the things we do, because not everybody is, super tech, and maybe they don't even have a website. So we make a page for that guest on your website so that if somebody comes up and says, I'm looking for Joe Schmo, they might actually find your site because that person doesn't have their own website. And now they have a page on your website. And then the other thing that really comes in handy is we make a page with all of your guests on it. So you can say, look, I've had Jack and Jill and Ernie and Bert. And so when you're trying to get someone to come on your show, you can kind of create that fear of missing out. Like, look, we got all the people over here, all these experts that have been on the show on this page. So you can send them a link when you're sending your pitch. You're an excellent person and you would fit in perfectly for my audience. I've listened to this, something that shows that you've really done your homework. Oh, by the way, in the past, we've had, guests like so-and-so and so-and-so. Here's a link to show all the guests who have previously been on the show. And that's one of those features that when I tell people about it, I'm not sure they really knew that was hiding back there, but it's really handy, especially if you're doing an interview show. It's one that can maybe get that guest that you've been trying. I interviewed somebody this week that does a gamer show, and he's been chasing somebody for 10 years. So sometimes getting that guest isn't always as easy as you want. But here's another, again, media hosts, to me, if you find one you love, stay there. If you're not happy with the one, try a new one. But Floyd Kennedy says, I'm presently with Megaphone, who provide the RSS for both podcasts. So there you go, whoever it's at. So if you have any other questions, feel free to throw them in.
John asked if there's any thought of having a network type of website that could host more than one podcast. So,
great question.
So we do have network websites, and we have websites that are built for podcast networks. Let's put it that way. Why am I being specific? Because the goal of these websites is for a podcast network that works with a lot of podcasts to be able to have a single website, and then each of those podcasts that they work with will have a subpage on their single website. And so, brendansnetwork.com/shows/podcast number one. And this gets confusing, and we can, feel free to keep going in the chat, but that is what the product is built for. It's built for a network to have sub pages that are shows. It's not built for someone to get like 2-for-1 pricing on their website, where they have their network, and then each website has its own domain name. The domain name sticks with the network because the website is supposed to be for a network. Okay, so that's one thing. So there's some people that sign up for that and say, okay, I want to add 10 podcasts, and I want each podcast to have its own domain name, and they're completely kind of separate, but they're all in one account. We have multi-podcast accounts, which means on your Podpage account, you can have multiple shows. The websites are totally different, and you can have multiple subscriptions. You can pay for however many upgrades you want for the different shows you have. And so that's what a lot of people will do. They have 2 podcasts. They just have 2, similar to Megaphone, what Floyd's saying. You just have 2 podcasts and you have 2 subscriptions with 2 websites. There is this edge case where someone like Dave wants to set up the Dave Jackson website, and Dave has, I don't know how many podcasts you have right now, 450? Dave has probably at any given time probably has 5 active podcasts.
Probably. Yeah.
And so he's like, I want Dave Jackson, and then I want to have a page on Dave Jackson for each podcast, which he could probably hack the network page to do this. But then I guess a better example is someone who's like, I'm a car dealer and I've got my used car and new car podcasts, and I just want one website for both of them. And the network page isn't really built for that kind of thing. So we don't really have a solution for that, where you have 2 RSS feeds coming into the same website on one domain. So that's a long-winded answer to, currently that's not something that, because sort of the object in our database is a podcast. That's a website is totally built around a podcast. And so when you have two podcasts, you have two websites, just by definition of how our data is structured.
Yeah,
So,
it's a great tool for if the idea, especially if you have a bunch of, similar shows, they're all about, the NFL. Everybody's got their own team, and it's like, so go to, we love football network.com, and it's a great place to go there and go, these are all of our shows. But if, as Brenden said, that's one domain for the network, and people on that network can't have their own domain. So what we've seen in some cases is the host of the show will have their own pod page that with their own domain, and then they'll have one that promotes all of them. And then what they do is they promote each. They just at the end of the show for more. If you love the NFL, you got to check out our network, and then they'll have that for the whole network, and then other people can find that. So, and the mystery has been solved. Here we were calling Floyd the voice of Floyd Kennedy. He's just Floyd Kennedy. Something was going on with the way Google had him sign into that. So there you go. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, it's something I've thought about doing multi-podcast pages, and when I look into the future and I squint and I think, why do people leave Podpage? Besides their leaving their podcast, which is 95% of people who cancel their Podpage account just are stopping their podcast. There's a time that if you take all of those people out and you look at the people who are left who leave, very few people leave because they don't like Podpage. They leave mostly because they're like, I need more. And it's usually they need more with customization, and they need more with customization because they have decided to do exactly what the one that I keep showing, All the Hacks did. All the Hacks was a podcast website because that was the brand. And then as the host and the show got bigger and better, the host became more of the brand than the podcast. And so it went from allthehacks.com to chrishutchins.com. And he was like, this is the point where if I didn't, and I know him pretty well, he's like, I probably would leave and build a WordPress site or something, because I need a website about me and about like the overall thing I offer, not necessarily about my podcast episodes as the top thing. And we worked together, and he used a lot of custom code and got what he wanted. But that's typically when people leave, is when they're like, oh, I now sell courses and I do this and I do that, and my podcast is important, but it's not the main thing. I want it to be one of 5 things, and Podpage always feels like the main thing in Podpage. And so I could see a time where we say like, all right, well, a website can exist without a podcast, which is just not really something that you can kind of do it now, but it doesn't look great. When we do that, then you could think like, oh, well, maybe like you can add multiple YouTube channels to a website. You can add multiple podcasts to a website. Like, so there's, it's like down the line, but it's something that comes up every once in a while.
Floyd said, I saw somewhere on the website that some people had subscribed and sent me messages. I can't find any messages. Well, if they subscribed, that might be, again, if you're using the Podpage form to collect emails, and messages would be under the contact page. So you could go in and see the messages there and delete them. And it might have been a voice.
When you log into the dashboard, click connect, and all of the tools for like actually interacting with fans should be there. And so when you click connect, you'll see build a mailing list. And when you click that, you'll see probably the list of email addresses that have subscribed to get emails from you. And then you also will see contact form. And that contact form, you'll see the messages that have come through. Those messages should be also emailed to you, but we do save them in case you want to see them. So.
Yeah. John says, I love Podpage because I'm allergic to code. Yes.
Yeah.
You and me both. The Richard, the Talk to Me guy, where would I find the list of guests page? I believe it's yourwebsite.com/ it's either people.
Guests.
Is it guests? Okay.
Yeah. So if you want to see it in the public sphere /guests, if you want to edit it, you can go. If you go into your Podpage dashboard now, there's a pages button, which we just introduced, like 6 months ago. And that should show you all the pages on your website. So if you have a page with guests, you'll see it there. Now, in order to have a page with guests, you need guests. So if you haven't set up any guests, you might not see it in that pages list. And there's an activate feature button underneath. You can go into there and you can add guests there. But that's where you'd find it.
And then asking here.
You just shoot us an email. This is a very hard thing to do in an AMA.
Yeah, I was going to say this might be
Individual
one where,
page support is really not what this is for, but that send us an email, support at Podpage, and we can look at your website and we can know what you're actually talking about.
yeah.
So, oh,
And
there
she
you
said,
go.
there you go. Just figured it out. Look at her
Good.
go. Excellent to hear. So, but we do appreciate if you're watching this later, we are not allergic to feedback. We are not afraid of our customers. We love to hear feedback. Realize there are some things that, you want us to kind of color way outside the lines of what Podpage is, but some of the features we showed today were based on user feedback. So we're always looking to, help you engage with your audience, help you grow your audience, and be found in Google and all the other search engines and things of that nature. So never hesitate to reach out to let us know. Hey, is there any way we could get it to do this? Because /newsletter happened because Gigi saw me at Podcast Movement and said, hey, how come there's no newsletter / thing? And I was like, that's a good point. So
Yep.
we're always ready for that. So Brenden, any other things that you want to bring up here as we get ready to wrap up?
No, I mean, the thing I'd add to that is not only do we really appreciate everyone's feedback, but we also try, and I don't know a lot of companies that do this through support and stuff, but we try to explain why we might not do something. So we have a
Yeah.
lot of people who write us and say, hey, I don't want to call anyone out, but someone recently, it was about the guest intake form, and it was a very peculiar use case that person was very committed to believing that it's a feature we should add. And instead of just being like, cool, we put it on our feature list, maybe we'll do it in the future, which is what almost any company would say. We always try to explain like, hey, this is actually one that we probably won't add. Or like you've heard me talking about stuff today, like here's what makes it hard, to try to give people a sense on like, we're probably not going to add it, or we're going to add it later this year, or we're thinking about it. And the reason we do that is because the last thing I want is someone to like be expecting us to be adding some
Right.
feature and then sit around and they're unhappy and they would prefer to find a platform that fit them. So we always try to not only take the feedback, but actually give you feedback on the feedback as to how likely it is. We had one last night that someone wrote us and said, hey, people are getting really confused with the guest intake form because the first field said name, just as the word name, and then email next to it. I haven't heard this feedback before, but they said that people were entering their first name and it wasn't clear that they needed to enter their full name. Again, we've had that feature for 2 or 3 years and haven't gotten that feedback, but it was reasonable and made sense. And it was very simple just to switch out that field to say full name. And so we pushed that feature that we got the feedback yesterday, probably at 5 p.m. And that was changed on the website at 7 p.m. And it's like that kind of feature that like, it only makes things clearer. So why not change it? So we take a lot of feedback, certain feedback we'll execute right away. Other stuff is just much harder. So.
Excellent. And as we said at the beginning, we're still kind of tweaking and trying to find out what the best format of these community meetups are. So if you have any feedback on those, again, you can just email support@podpage.com. I like AMAs because it's always fun seeing what people throw at us. But if you wanted more, like I did the one on interviews, we interviewed Chris a while back, bring in experts, whatever you want, we're always happy to give you whatever you want. So thanks again for showing up. We deeply appreciate that. And again, any feedback going forward, simply you can just email support@podpage.com. And what's fun is the behind the scenes. This is what's always fun about live stuff is my Stream Deck, the little box that sits on my desk is sitting here and the button that says end is just spinning. It's like, oh, all right. So how am I going to end this? I guess I will just close Ecamm in this case, which is what I'm using. But thanks for everybody coming out. And we'll see you next month with another community meetup.
Thanks,
Take care.
everyone.